Welcome back to One Piece Explained. The last few chapters of the series has brought us crashing towards the God Valley incident, which ends up kicking off in chapter 1160. I know the past few weeks have been a bit unstable on the channel, with some videos getting taken down for copyright, and so to try my best in mitigating that outcome, I'm trying out a different format of breakdown for this video. Hopefully this works a little better, and if you have any thoughts about it, let me know down in the comments. And because I missed the last two chapters, in this video I'll be going through them really briefly, talking about the major points in each one, and then we'll get into chapter 1160 proper. That said, with our 40th entry in the Overchild Yamato's Golden Harvest Circuit Pilgrimage cover story comes the full reveal of the mysterious warrior that fought Kaido, who was born in the West Blue and raised in Ringo, Kozuki Moriya. Now, while theoretically this could be an entirely new character, there is an awful lot of reason to believe that this is actually who we know in the present day as Gekko Moria. We know Moriya was born in the West Blue, but aside from that, our first bit of insight into his early days comes from his attendance at Roger's execution when he was 26 years old, and a year later he would return to Ringo where he clashed with Kaido. So that's roughly 2.5 decades of his life unaccounted for. It could easily be the case that he was taken to Ringo as a child and raised there. Under what circumstances, however, is not totally clear. Perhaps his parents were among the group of 25 people that left Wano 55 years ago, which included other potential Ringo natives such as Shimotsuki Furiko, who was the older sister of Ringo's daimyo, Ushimaru. While 10 members of that group would end up in the East Blue and form Shimotsuki Village, it's never really mentioned what happened to the rest of that party. This has allowed many fun possibilities, ranging from explanations for why Tashigi looks so similar to Kuina, how Shiki and Kyo may have found their way to rocks, and even how Higurashi left the country before returning to conspire with Orochi over a decade later. So there's totally room for Moriya's parents to have left Wano 55 years ago, settled in the West Blue, given birth to Moriya 50 years ago, and then eventually returned to Wano at some point later on. It should be noted that Oda did draw Moriya as a child back during the Volume 63 SPS, and his outfit there does not really resemble anything that we've seen from Wano. In fact, it's much more aligned to the American Western-inspired imagery that we see from islands in the West Blue, with these boots with spurs. So I would imagine that we could take this to mean that he may not have been brought back to Wano immediately after his birth, but instead sometime in his childhood. Now, the most interesting and perhaps the most indicative part of this revelation is that Moriya was a member of the Kozuki family. While this could be an honorary surname, we haven't really seen the family name be given to other individuals close to the family, such as Kinemon or other scabbards, so perhaps he really does have Kozuki blood in his veins. And speaking of family names, it's probably not coincidence that Gekko Moriya's last name, Gekko, can be read using the kanji for moon and light, which when reversed makes the same Kozuki in the Kozuki clan. In any case, this just adds even more importance to Moriya, who has been this ever so interesting character with mysterious connections throughout the story. One has to wonder if he has some knowledge regarding the poneglyphs, since the Kozuki clan were the ones who made them in the distant past. While Momonosuke was never taught how to read them due to his father's untimely death, it was said that the ability was cut short on his father's generation, from which Moriya would be part of. And at the very least, Moriya having a connection to the clan would allow him to reunite with Sukiyaki, who would have the ability to read them as well. Moriya's connection to the Kozuki could be how one of the emperors end up with a way to read the poneglyphs, particularly Buggy, since Cross Guild is looking to be a team-up between the warlords of the past. I guess we should also talk about how to the people of Wano, Moriya is believed to be dead, and since news from the outside world does not really travel into Wano, especially under Kaido and Orochi's rule, it follows that Moriya's activity as a warlord never got through, and conveniently, he would slip under the radar of the scabbards who were sent to the future, as they would arrive just around the start of the time skip. After the events of Marineford, Moriya would largely remain in the shadows, with his first public appearance since then being his attack on Full Lead, which was documented in the paper. This is how Perona came to realize that he was actually alive, suggesting that to most of the world, Moriya's status was unclear. This is such a wild development for both Moriya and this cover story as a whole, and the way it was introduced is very peculiar. I have some hopes that this will have some big implications, and perhaps we'll see Moriya return to Wano in this cover story. And depending on the status of Big Mom and Kaido, there are some interesting possibilities for either of them to be reanimated with Moriya's abilities, so we'll just have to see. Now, as for the chapter itself, we do start getting more and more indication that the events of God Valley will be prompted by Shaki's disappearance, at least for the pirates involved. We check in with the Roger Pirates briefly and get some confirmation that the object of Shaki's affection is actually Rayleigh, which is something that we kind of knew from the present day anyways. But one bit of new information from this chapter is that the cook of the crew is Max Marks. This was not revealed to us in Volume 112's SPS, where the rest of the crew got their roles revealed. We then go back in time to just after the end of the previous native hunting competition, before the God Valley incident, where we find Garling before the Five Elders. This scene of course mirrors his appearance in chapter 1125, where he came to reveal that he was the new godhead head of science and defense, replacing Saturn, who is actually not depicted in this scene. It's likely that he's actually there on the other side of Mars, but is hidden behind the speech bubble as a tongue-in-cheek nod by Oda to the future configuration of the Elders. In a previous chapter, we talked about how one of the silhouettes of the Elders looked a bit off, making us wonder if Jupiter was actually an Elder at that point in time. While we do not get a good look at that Elder in this chapter, his appearance from behind at least resembles what we know of Jupiter with his tall and lanky design, and at this point, I suppose the door on this mystery fifth Elder is not fully closed, so we'll have to see if this is really something Oda is intending, or if it's just something that we're looking too closely into. Now, Garling mentions that he has made an extraordinary discovery on God Valley and recommends it for the next competition. During this week, there were a lot of speculation over what this could be, ranging from rare resources to even ancient weapons, but as we'd soon learn, it was actually the existence of the Davy clan, which we'll talk more about in just a bit. Later on, over at Pirate Island Fuloled, we revisit Shaki's bar and the crowd of pirates it has attracted. Here we got the suggestion that Rox had found himself a lover since we last saw him, and on top of that, a child to boot. Shaki and the women on the crew all snuff it out, while Whitebeard is completely oblivious. Of note, Wenji has never been portrayed as being head over heels for Shaki like the men on the Rocks Pirates, so their inclusion here alongside Big Mom and Stussy had reinforced my suspicion that they may actually be a woman, since up until this point, I don't think they've necessarily been gendered in conversation outright. Though, of course, their lack of interest in Shaki seems to actually be part of a greater plot point involving Shaki's abduction, which we'll talk about a bit later. Zebek's child is of course Teach, better known as Blackbeard in the present day, a connection that we were strangely told immediately upon Rox's introduction just a few chapters ago. I for one am certainly not anyone to tell Oda how to write his story, but I can't help but feel that Zebek's connection to Teach could have been played as more of a mystery. It feels like a lot of these big developments are being undercut, whether that is a byproduct of the pacing or just how Oda sequences the reveals, but there may be a greater intention behind this, and I'll get into more of that in the next chapters. After learning that Shaki has settled on Fuloled, the Roger Pirates come crashing into the bar. Now, while every Roger Pirate we've seen in these chapters has been named and shown in the story before, it seems that we're actually getting the proper manga debut of a crewmate here with the long-haired fellow above Elio, Yaman. He's the only member of the crew that was not depicted throughout the Odin flashback in the manga, despite being later named in the Volume 96 SBS, where we saw his concept art with this long flowing hair. Roger and Rox literally and figuratively butt heads as we get some more dialogue suggesting that the two have clashed over the years, and I will admit, it is a bit disappointing that the rivalry between Rox and Roger has only been suggested across this flashback, even though Rox was made out to be Roger's greatest foe. Though that was something said by Sengoku, so for all we know, that could have just been marine propaganda and not necessarily the whole truth. After all, it seems Roger and Garp had a much more explicit rivalry as shown in these chapters and the rest of the series at large. After getting turned down by Shaki, Roger asks for Whitebeard, hoping to have a drink with him, hinting at their more friendly relationship that we'd come to see in the future. It also turns out that Rayleigh stayed behind on the ship, where we find him singing Binks' Brew. While he cites that he was not feeling well here, this tendency to stay behind on the ship while the crew goes ahead to the island is not unlike Zoro, who we've seen do similarly throughout the series. Later on, over in Elbaf, we find Rox and Harold clashing once again, as it seems Harold had ambushed the pirate after agreeing to the world government's terms that were mentioned in the previous chapter. It looks like both Hiruden and Loki are bearing witness to their fight, reinforcing their own rivalry, with Loki looking up to Rox, while Hiruden to their own father. The clashing strikes of Conqueror's Haki send shockwaves across the underworld, as we see various animals running in fear, including a bear and the Wintersaurus that we had previously seen, but present is also the Wolf Rabbit, another design from Strongworld. The giant wolves that we see at the start of the arc look similar, but lack the distinctive long ears. Now Rox points out how naive Harold is being, as the government just looks at him as a soldier to be used for war, but Harold feels strongly enough about joining the rest of the world and offering the giant's might for a greater cause than just wreaking havoc on the innocent. This would be the last time the two old friends would meet for a while, and we find Loki looking out at sea hoping for more news on Rox. Note that the newspaper here is big enough for him to actually read, meaning it had to have been enlarged for him by Biblo. Now the chapter ends with the birth of Shamrocks and Shanks on God Valley, bringing us to 39 years ago. Up until this point, we've known that Shanks was originally from the West Blue, and that he had ended up on the Roger Pirates ship after the events of God Valley, but this makes hard confirmation that he was indeed born on that island. This does make some things a bit more confusing though, as back during his meeting with Whitebeard, Shanks mentioned the alcohol he brought from his hometown in the West Blue. As far as we know, God Valley disappeared after the namesake incident, so there's still something to resolve there. While we don't see their mother's face, we do see that her hair is colored with the same unique shade that Shamrock and Shanks have, meaning they get their hair from her side. This is of course the reason why Garling was in God Valley to begin with when he made his discovery, but it's still not clear why he decided to go about his relationship with Shanks and Shamrock's mother in this way. As we've seen throughout the series, celestial dragons usually just enslave their wives, so Garling allowing her to live is quite curious. Anyways, this takes us to chapter 1159, and the 41st entry in the cover story features Yamato, Ulti, and Page 1 leaving Ringos with apples in hand, the fruit that the region is named after. Beside them is Onimaru, who we last saw toward the end of Wano. Now the chapter itself starts on a much less cheerful note as we come to learn that Shaki has been abducted and Don Marlin has been killed. Both of these developments are not entirely shocking, as we had speculated for a while now that Shaki, the greatest treasure of Pirate Island, would be taken and eventually used as a prize on God Valley. Don Marlin was also the only other initial Rock's crewmate who was not given a future epithet or status back when the crew was introduced, with the other one being Gansui, who we know would end up dead as a corpse possessed by Moria pre-time skip. We had speculated that Marlin would be one of the ones to die on God Valley, however, so this is still coming as a bit of a shock. The news caused panic and grief throughout the world at large, having said to even stop the economy for a while, which is pretty crazy. However, the only person that is shown taking this tragedy well is Wang Ji, as we find them counting a stack of money. Later on in the chapter, when it's revealed to the Rock's pirates that Shaki is still alive, Wang Ji is the only one to question the credibility of that report as they start sweating. All of this, of course, suggests that Wang Ji was involved in Shaki's abduction, which follows as they were the one supposedly male crewmate who was not fawning over Shaki in the previous chapters. There was also the suggestion that there was a traitor among the crew just a few chapters ago, when it seemed like someone had tipped the Marines off on the crew's raid. In my last video, which I guess most people would not have seen since it was taken down by a copyright strike, I narrowed down the 3 crewmates who seemed the most likely to have been the traitor in that instance. In short, Kaido was considered, given him being the youngest and most influenceable member of the crew, on top of him having spent the most time with the Marines while he was getting captured. Stussy was another candidate, given her clone's ability to be a CP0 agent, despite her likeness having been associated with both the Rocks and Mads, 2 groups that had both fell at the hands of the world government while she was on them. And of course, Wang Ji, who we knew had ended up as the Commodore of Fololed in the present day before Blackbeard, and had been one of the crewmates missing from the Rock's pirate spread in chapter 1096, suggesting that they may not have joined the crew in their demise, something that seems even more likely given chapter 1160. Now this takes us to a year later, just before the God Valley incident, and we find Garling stabbing his children's mother. He mentions that if Shamrock and Shanks are to live anywhere, it will not be on God Valley, as the island will soon no longer exist. This raises some questions, firstly about his intent for the children, as it's not clear if he's actually meaning that he'll have them live somewhere else instead, such as at the Holy Land. It's also interesting that he says the island won't be around anymore, as up until this point, we had assumed God Valley disappeared either because of the incident involving Rocks and Roger, or because it was physically moved as part of the theory that God Valley became Thriller Bark. However, now, it seems like it was always the plan for the island to be destroyed or disappeared in some capacity as part of the hunting competition. With this, the preparation for the deadly game starts as Marines flood the island and tranquilize the residents. Among this group is a young Monkey D. Dragon who would be 17 years old at this time, the same age as Luffy when he was set out to sea. There's not too much resemblance between the two, aside from the dark heavy eyes that we see with Luffy when he uses Gear 4th. On his arm is a unique design that we would see tattooed on his face later in life, suggesting that there is some greater significance to it. We had learned Dragon was formerly a Marine and had been trained in using weaponry back during the Kuma flashback, and so it was largely speculated that Dragon may have actually been a participant in the God Valley incident in one way or another. We see him question the nature of the mission as he asks the lieutenant commander why they're doing this in the first place, which prompts the lie about this all being a training exercise. Dragon, of course, does not really buy it, but begrudgingly complies anyways, thinking that at the very least he's not killing them. Meanwhile, we're introduced to the Marines' prison ships, which are interestingly depicted as being all black. This brings to mind the few things we know about the Burnscar man, who was speculated to be a former government affiliate with a pitch black ship. Could it be that Burnscar sails one of these prison ships? There's also the theory that Dragon is Burnscar, which could further be bolstered if we come to learn that his ship, the Wind Grandma, is actually a repurposed Navy ship. And in a similar vein, Diaz Drake's ship, the Liberal Hind, is also an all-black Marine ship, perhaps having once been a prison ship as well. A lot of interesting potential here. Anyways, inside we find the slaves being transported from the outside world to God Valley, and among them is Kuma, Ginny, and Ivankov. This is seemingly when Ginny was able to send a message to the outside world, and we had learned in chapter 1096 that she did this 2 weeks prior to the day of the God Valley incident, meaning that this is when this scene is likely taking place in this chapter. If this timeline is to be trusted, it's somewhat interesting that Shanks and Shamrock's mothers survived for 2 weeks after being stabbed by Garling, but hey. We learn that Ginny's message had made its way to a young Morgans who would only be 15 years old at this point in time. He tries to strike a deal with Cypherpole to shut him up so he doesn't report it to the world, but will end up disclosing it to Pirate Island anyways, once again showing that he's interested in stirring trouble across the world for his own entertainment and profit. Now, during Kuma's flashback, we learned that Morgans was a writer who had published a cover-up story about the God Valley incident, going on about Garp's heroics, suggesting that the government would end up playing ball with him by that point. At that time, we assumed that he was just a contributor to the paper, so it's amazing to see that he had owned the paper this whole time, even at such a young age. I guess it follows that his albatross zone allowed him to communicate with birds such as the Newsku and distribute newspapers across the globe. Though it's interesting that we're still seeing Morgans in his hybrid form even as a child. The idea so far had been that Morgans' identity in the present day is too important for us as readers to know, so he's only been shown in his hybrid form to preserve that mystery. But I guess this means that his appearance would still be a giveaway at a young age as well, so we'll have to see where this goes. We see the intel make its way to Pirate Island and eventually the world of pirates as well, prompting several crews to make their way toward God Valley, including the Roger Pirates. This does bring into question how Garp ended up with this information. Back in 1096, we saw Kong try and get Garp to go to God Valley to help fight off the pirates, and the way he spoke about it seemed to suggest that Kong couldn't disclose to Garp the true nature of the situation, but Garp was already aware both about the Celestial Dragon's involvement and Shaki's abduction. It's possible that he was able to end up getting the intel dispersed by Morgans as well, or perhaps he was clued in by his son, Dragon, who would have been involved in the preparation for the event. In either case, it is pretty interesting that Garp is shown relaxing poolside on vacation while his son is being forced to take part in this atrocity. I know there are a lot of memes surrounding Garp and his loyalty to the Marines, but I've always viewed his philosophy as being somewhat apathetic. He recognizes that they are scum, but he himself feels like he can't do too much about it, and so he tries to detach himself from them whenever possible, all the while trying to raise the next generation who will be able to do more, as seen by all of his pupils ending up pushing back against the world government in some shape or form. Now, on the way to Fullerled, the Rock's crew encounters Harold's ship, with this seemingly being another trap by the government. The entire exchange between Rox and Harold is quite interesting, with it echoing scenes we've had between other rivals in the past. Rox's crew finds this to be a waste of time, as we get the long-awaited inclusion of Gil Bastar among the crew, who we had initially been teased as a crewmate during that Kuma flashback. It's with this that we get the bombshell reveal that Xebec true name is Davy D. Xebec, with him being a descendant of the notorious pirate of legend, Davy D. Jones. We first heard of him back during the Long Ring Longland arc, as it was explained that he was a pirate from the distant past that was allegedly cursed by a demon to live on the seafloor, and that the Davy back fights honored his legend. The curse by a demon is quite interesting actually, given what we've recently seen from Emu's abilities, but as it turns out, the Davy clan has lived in hiding for centuries, last having been in God Valley, which is Rox's homeland. These are all some huge reveals, and they definitely make sense thematically with how they bolster the importance of Rox and Blackbeard as these crucial figures in the present day, with connections to the Void Century, furthering that parallel with Roger, Luffy, Joy Boy, etc. Now, part of me does feel like it is a bit much, particularly for Blackbeard, as he's had two hidden names of importance revealed in this very flashback, with him being the descendant of both Rox and Davy, but I suppose it is to be expected. We were told earlier in this flashback that Rox was a worshipper of Davy Jones, and I sort of wish we weren't, as this feels like it got ahead of the reveal here a bit, but I digress. What's important though is that Rox's motivation for God Valley is not truly to save Shaki or plunder, but rather to ensure the safety of his wife and child. This is exploitable information that he cannot divulge to anyone on his crew, and only feels safe in trusting it to Harold, his old friend despite their current circumstances. This is very much like Roger in his last moments entrusting Ace's safety to Garp. What follows is a bit curious, however, as Harold refuses Rox's final request to join him and claims that he'd rather sink the pirate crew, but he also orders his men not to get involved in this battle. This is a huge 180 from just before the conversation, where Harold was boasting that it would be rather easy for his band of giants to sink the Rox ship. It seems that Harold is purposely pulling his punches here and allowing Rox to defeat him and his crew to make the government ship surveilling the exchange think that Harold was simply being bested in combat rather than him going against the government's orders. I have to wonder if this is what Summers was talking about as Harold's mistake, or if there's something else that happens later on in time. The chapter ends bringing us to the day of the God Valley incident, as we find Shaki at the center of the stage. Surrounding her are curiously 9 treasure chests, likely all holding devil fruits, but what makes this a bit off is that there were only 6 chests during the depiction of the God Valley incident in Kuma's flashback. While this could be a retcon, it should also be noted that amongst the group of 9 are 6 chests that share near identical design, which lines up with the 6 in Kuma's flashback. We know the scene in Kuma's flashback is taking place a little later in time, so perhaps 3 of those chests were removed for one reason or another. Anyways, we see a young Summers as well as Gunko, who's shown beside the Manmeyer family representative that we first met during Kuma's flashback. More on this in just a bit. And elsewhere in the island, it seems Dragon has come across Shanks and Shamrock's mother, begging him to save her children, which is juxtaposed by Teach and his mother, shown imprisoned in a cage. While this flashback was initially about Loki and Harold, and then a bit later on about Rox, it seems it's going to be doing some heavy lifting to set up Shanks and Blackbeard's origins as well. Quite the twist of fate that both of them ended up as survivors on God Valley. This then takes us to chapter 1160, which of course starts with the 42nd entry to Yamato's cover story. Yamato finally returns to Flower Capital as we get them beside a shrine dedicated to Oden and those who died fighting for him, such as Yasue, Ashura, and Izo. This was actually first mentioned by Kinemon in a conversation with Kawamatsu and Marco at the end of the Wano arc, where he intended on creating a temple similar to the one in Ringo that was dedicated to Ryuma. It's nice to see that get paid off. Now, Page 1 and Ulti are absent in this one, though it could be understood that they're just further back behind Yamato and I'm not yet caught up. But one peculiarity in this scene is the lack of the Straw Hat pirate flag underneath the castle. Luffy gave this to Momonosuke at the end of the Wano arc for Wano to use as a symbol of the Straw Hat's protection. We saw that it was placed under the castle during the Egghead arc, and it was also present in 2 entries at the start of the cover story, so it's a bit curious that it's no longer here. I wonder if this could suggest that someone has taken it down, perhaps in frustration of seeing it there, maybe a former antagonist of the Straw Hats, maybe even Kazuki Moria. As mentioned before, it would make a lot of sense for Moria to retreat to his homeland after being freed from Blackbeard's prison, especially with Wano being freed from Kaido and Orochi's rule. It would be rather funny if he believes that he has a birthright to the throne of Shogun, believing the rest of the clan to be dead. There are other possibilities, of course, between things like Big Mom or Kaido returning, so I'm interested in seeing where Oda is going to go with this. Even though the pilgrimage is complete, I'm definitely not ready for this cover story to end anytime soon. The chapter itself resumes with the center stage of God Valley as the crowd of Celestial Dragons disparage the members of the Navy clan in the center. It seems the Celestial Dragons have despised the Davy clan for generations, likely for their affiliation with Davy D. Jones. This is rather comparable to the Buccaneers, who are a specific race of humans with giant's blood. One of the Celestial Dragons even draws the comparison almost literally and questions if the Davy clan are actually Buccaneers themselves. It's not confirmed in this chapter, but it's interesting for Oda to include that statement, especially when we see that the men of the clan are rather large themselves, with a stature similar to that of what we saw from Kuma and Clap. One of them also appears to be wearing a straw hat, which of course is eyebrow raising. There's been some speculation about whether Davy D. Jones was actually Joy Boy himself, so it definitely would not surprise me if these ancient characters and lineages are more conflated than we think. We get this fun scene of Saturn beside his future replacement, Garling, as he commends him on his competency for fighting the Davy clan. Garling cites it as fate, which echoes how Rox viewed the events of God Valley in the prior chapter, and is also what informs Blackbeard's motivations and actions in the present day. We see this young Blackbeard in his mother's arms, just absolutely terrified at everything going on. Now, while at face value, it does feel very heavy-handed that Teach is being written as this character with incredible circumstances defined by fate, and I definitely think I'd be more annoyed by that if this was all that was going on. After some careful consideration, I actually think this is sort of intentional. Across the series, Blackbeard has always been attributing his actions to fate, almost as if he's had some sort of chip on his shoulder, a reason to believe that he deserves everything he gets or that everything he does is justified. And across these chapters, we're being given what exactly that chip was. He's the son of the worst pirate to have sailed the seas in modern history, and the descendant of another legendary pirate that has been hated throughout the centuries. In the context of the story about pirates, he is the most pirate. What you would think is the prototypical main character of a series where the goal is to follow in the footsteps of a fabled pirate of days past. And this is a trick that Oda has used before, as in this way, Teach is very much like Ace, another pirate who is the son of a legendary pirate that prompted the story to take place by promising the existence of this great treasure. These are characters for all intents and purposes that are written as if they should be the main characters of the story, but they're not. And that's why Ace's death is so important at Marineford on a larger narrative level, because he was supposed to be the quote-unquote chosen one, but instead died protecting our actual main character. And while there are arguments for whether or not Luffy is just a much character of prophecy or having this chosen quality, it should be noted that it's not what defines Luffy to himself. Unlike Ace and now Blackbeard, who seem to internalize their circumstances and upbringings and use those to motivate their own goals and arcs, Luffy has at every step actively rejected all of that, to the point where he did not even know he had a father, despite Dragon being one of the world's worst criminals. And this has even continued to this day, as we saw earlier in the arc, that Luffy still does not fully understand or care about the history of Nika, the Sun God, Joy Boy, or any of that really. And that is largely why this over-the-top, fate-drenched backstory for Blackbeard is actually working for me on some level. It provides a fantastic foil for Luffy. Now, it's suggested that the Davy clan we see on stage are part of the 13 super rare rabbits in the competition. We first heard about them in chapter 1096 and were briefly brushed over as having already been introduced. It seems like the scene in this current chapter is part of that introduction. On stage, we can make out roughly 10 distinct people, with one of their silhouettes at the bottom actually being two, since we see Teachers in his mother's arms. Her appearance is a bit striking, as she definitely resembles Robin to a degree, and it's not clear if this is intentional or just another case of Oda reusing designs, though it would be pretty wild if we come to find out that those old theories of Robin and Blackbeard being related were actually true. Anyways, this is likely who Blackbeard got the Marshall family name from. We had gotten concept art for Blackbeard's mother in volume 8 of the One Piece magazine, where she was portrayed as an elderly woman, alongside concept art of Blackbeard's sisters. It would seem he's decided to go a different direction entirely, which really begs the question of just how much of this was always planned, but the discussion is for another day. Now, Kuma is likely one of those super rare rabbits given his status, which leaves us just a few left. Given that Garland was deducted 10,000 points for killing the King of God Valley back in chapter 1095, I wonder if the King and Queen were intended to be part of this group as well. There were also 150 rare rabbits, which likely included the slaves that were shipped out for the event in particular, which include Ginny and Ivankov, and we were told that there were 100,000 regular rabbits who live on the island. We also learned back then that there were 200 world nobles that were playing the part of the hunters, and this chapter gives us a better look at many of the key players. Of course, this competition is being relayed back to the Holy Land as we knew, but here we see Celestial Dragons betting on the competition as well. It's with this that we get the mention of a new family, the Bavette. This brings our total count of noble family names to 12, alongside Jay Garcia, Marcus, Topman, Ethan Barron, Shepard, Figureland, Manmeyer, Remo Shifu, Nerona, Nefertari, and Don Quixote. Only the latter three have been confirmed as members of the founding 20 who created the world government, but it's somewhat likely that all 12 were part as well. One of the Celestial Dragons has bet on Gunko for the individual competition, and this decision is questioned by another who states that she is just the knighthood's pet devoted blade of God, and this is also what she's introduced as in this flashback. Now, Gunko's status as a Celestial Dragon has been questioned for a long time throughout this arc, but fairly recently, her introduction had been updated in the volume edition of the manga to include that she was a saint and part of the Manmeyer family with the release of volume 112. This threw a wrench into many of the theories surrounding her and Brook, especially if she's always been a Celestial Dragon. We had seen that she was previously a personal servant for Emu around a decade or so earlier when Rox attacked the Holy Land, but now it seems she's taken to a combat role. It should be noted that she does end up as a Holy Knight in the present day, so her unique status as a devoted blade of God may be somewhat temporary. This promotion helps to explain why she was so worked up about Loki refusing to join the ranks of the Holy Knights, as it's something that she seemingly values. Her eventually being promoted to this rank may also hint at the fate of the Manmeyer Holy Knight that we first saw back during God Valley, if the assumption that each family only has one knight at a time turns out to be true. Now, what's also interesting about Gunko here is her outfit, which appears to be much more aligned with what we saw from the other Holy Knights in the present day, with this regal militaristic look, a drastic departure from what she wears now. Albeit she is still rocking a skirt here, so maybe not too far off. The appearance is actually quite reminiscent of what she was shown wearing in that brief flashback she had before Emu took control, as we pointed out her epaulets. There, she was screaming for her father, which makes things rather ambiguous if that's in reference to another Celestial Dragon, or if there's something going on where she was taken into the Celestial Dragons after being separated from her true family. In that same chapter, we also saw a broken silhouette with a very similar outfit, which muddies things even more about her celestial origins. As a quick aside, behind those two Celestial Dragons betting, you can see the symbol of the Celestial Dragons, the Flying Hoof, which Sabo and the other revolutionaries destroyed during the raid on Mary Joie as a declaration of war. We also see Summers taking part in the quote-unquote fun, as he constructs a rather devious situation for father and son as they die to Summers' thorns. He had monologued about watching parents die for their children earlier in the arc, in the present day as well, when it came to the children of Elbaf. Elsewhere, we learned that Dragon had actually encountered his future revolutionary contemporaries on God Valley and helped them out by taking out a Celestial Dragon who was looking to kill them, though of course, he was using the tranquilizer rounds that he was equipped with in the previous chapter. The Rox pirates come charging in, much like we saw in chapter 1096, though the spread includes Rox himself, as they've yet to reach the shore at this point, and we also see Kyo in the mix as well, yanking on Shiki's hair. Absent from the scene is of course Ganzui and Gil Bastar, who were shown in that previous spread, as well as a few other unnamed members. However, it is confirmed that Wang Ji did not end up joining them on this venture, which makes sense given that they were the traitors who sold out Shaki in the first place. Perhaps Wang Ji knows that the Rox pirates are sailing to their demise and was opportunistic enough to claim Pirate Island for himself as soon as Rox died. We see the sequence of Marines firing at the Rox ship as it crashes into the island, where Rox yells out the same line from chapter 1096 as he jumps off the boat and runs off ahead. We would get the spread for the rest of the crew in 1096 as the subsequent scene. While the pirates are invading, Dragon is able to find Shanks and Shamrock amidst the commotion, and I wonder if this means that we can take Garling's line about telling children to watch him in 1096 to be in reference to the other Holy Knights, assuming the twins were not close to the stage. After Shamrock's reveal, it was speculated that he may have been talking to his own children, but I guess it's still not explicitly clear just yet. Meanwhile, the Roger pirates are also charging in, giving us this awesome panel of the group. At the center are of course Roger between Rayleigh and Gabon, who seem to be side-eyeing their captain who's claimed Jackie for himself. The dialogue makes it seem like this is happening just after the scene of 1096, where Gabon exclaims that there's no special privileges for the captain. From left to right, behind them, you can spot what looks to be Doringo, who is mostly cut off, but you can see what looks like his black wings in the back. In front of them is Mugren. Between Roger's blade and Gabon's axe looks to be Boncro. Then the next person over, I've seen some people think is supposed to be the movie character Douglas Bullet, but it's actually Rangrum. Jackson Banner's to the right, and then Taro, Max Marks, and Peter Moo, who is also a bit cut off. Trampling over Roger, we can see Mr. Mamora and Don Kino as well. The arrival of Roger's crew prompts the Holy Knights to take action, and of note, it seems that their formal title has been upgraded in the Viz English translation. In the original Japanese, the team's been referred to as Kami no Kishidan, which is understood literally as God's Knights, but it seems that this has been romanized as the Knights of God, so the English translation seems to have followed suit and formalized it as the Holy Knights of God. This panel is incredible as we get some very fun designs. Of course, at the center is Garling, and surrounding him in that first row are all knights that we've seen before, with Summers to the left. The woman in bovine masked man that was shown with Garling in 1096 are present as well, though their weapons of choice are shown here with the woman wielding a very triangular blade, almost looking like a flat lance, and the masked man with a scythe. The Manmeyer Holy Knight is shown with the weapon of choice being a gun, as we saw before, but behind them are two very large individuals, with this woman with horns and sharp fangs and sunglasses. She somewhat resembles a fishman given her features, and I have to wonder if she's related to Killingham, who we also saw with similar teeth in the present day. However, it would be a bit odd for them to allow a fishman among their ranks, given the Celestial Dragon's explicit racism, but hey, they also tried to recruit Loki, so who knows. And even more interestingly is this giant creature, also with horns and fangs, and a general furry or woolly appearance. He seems to have wings as well that stretch out to the sides of the panels, and this weird arc extends around him, almost in the shape of a ray of light, sort of reminiscent of Enel's conjoined drums. I'm not really sure what to make of this guy. It feels like it's probably a Devil Fruit Zoan form rather than an actual creature or different species, and perhaps some sort of like gargoyle or demon given the wings. Let me know what you think in the comments. These two may be the two tallest silhouettes that we saw among the group in 1096. Absent from this lineup is the masked knight with twin blades, as well as the smiling knight with frills around their collar. Who knows, maybe one of them is actually that large creature transformed. Hopefully we'll get to see more of these guys in action coming up. And the chapter ends off with Garp's fleet arriving to save the day, as he throws a meteor fist from afar, blowing up a swarm of pirates. Beside him is Bogart as well, who we've been dying to see in proper action. While a decent part of this chapter was fleshing out the scenes that we already saw from 1096, it does look like we're going to be getting the full God Valley incident with this flashback, and I'm sure there are more surprises that we've yet to see, like for example, who was the Doflamingo family's Holy Knight? Could we see a young Homing taking part in this atrocity, or even see a young Doflamingo back watching from home? Anyways, if you made it this far into the video, thanks for sticking around. If you're new to the channel or enjoyed this video and want to show your support, consider subscribing so you can get all my videos as soon as they come out. The rest of my manga breakdowns can be found in the playlist in the description. And that said, thank you so much for watching, stay safe, and I hope to see you in the next one.